Cynicism is just another form of cowardice.
Give the face version.
Where our sergeants are not interested in our midlife crisis, we were to do our frickin' work.
Well, I mean, let's be honest.
Southern drawl.
And I'm like, people think I look and sound like that. Real nice. Will Smith has something to say. He made a whole movie about that.
As he's taller than Spike.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of the Spotlight Podcast, Success Stories for Veterans, where it's usually our job to break down and analyze heavy hitters within the military and veteran community. But today we're bringing in a heavy hitter from the veteran community, a man by the name of Jason Roncoroni. And Jason just recently published his book, Beyond the Military, A Leader's Handbook for Warrior Reintegration. That is an absolute wealth of knowledge on the transition space. So we brought him in to help me break down some very important topics that are very relevant to the veteran community. Stick around. I think since you are the resident expert, Jason, and it's just me and you today, why don't you jump in? What's something that you've been seeing relative to veterans in the transition space that is either bothering you or is exciting you?
Well, I think one of the greatest challenges in the transition is what I call the identity crisis that happens and really kind of comes from having spent years or decades attached to the military culture, the military set of values, the military mission and purpose. And when you leave, you don't have that same connection to those qualities anymore. And you really have to find that in yourself. And so what I've discovered is that that's probably the greatest challenge and often the most overlooked challenge. Because typically what happens in the transition process is that we focus on fixing or landing veterans into another job. And we presume that all these other factors are kind of taken care of in the job. And so what I've challenged transitioning service members and their families to do is to put this identity stuff first and then go look for the job so that you can find something that really kind of connects with that deeper sense of passion and purpose.
Agreed. And that actually bleeds very well into what I was planning on talking about today. So, let's jump into how we break that down a little bit. So if I'm a veteran and I'm maybe not transitioned yet, right, or I'm still in the military, because I've been having this conversation a lot lately with people who are about to transition out, and they're going through this fear and uncertainty phase, because as they're getting towards the end, they're starting to realize, hey, I don't have this figured out, and now I'm nervous. And then you actually posted about it today. The decision about whether I stay or I go becomes very, very focused on the front of their brain, and then they start doubting themselves. And I personally think that if you approach your transition from a position of from a place of doubt or fear, no matter how tight the rest of your plan is, it's going to fall apart. Right, your transition is going to be painful. So how do you recommend people get into that and actually start defining themselves a little tighter, or what their new version of themselves is going to be?
Well, first off, I agree with you. I think that, oh man, I got a dog barking. So let me out. There, that should be better. Can you still hear her in the background a little bit?
Just a tad, but that's fine.
Okay, so when you think about this idea, and what you're talking about is this fear, and the fear is really kind of what dominates the military transition process.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that you really have to do is you got to call it out. and you got to recognize the things that are giving you that fear. And a lot of that comes from psychologically, we've gained a lot of comfort from this attachment that we have in the military. From a psychological perspective, there's a certain happiness chemicals that come from being connected in the military culture. The sense of trust and camaraderie that we feel, gives us that steady drip of oxytocin. And the sense of respect and stature that we gain through the military is what gives us the serotonin. And so what happens is when you leave the military, you lose that. And so, you kind of remove yourself from that deep pool of comfort that you once had. And so what that forces you to do, because you're not getting it externally, you really have to look internally.
Yeah.
And what's really hard is that if you've never done it before, and most of us haven't, because most of us joined the military right out of high school. And so we've never lived those life experiences that help to kind of reveal our own purpose and our own values. So we have to discover them really kind of later in life. And to me, that's the first step, is you've got to do that inside work of, okay, what are my values for real? And how do I define my purpose statement? And the military gave me a mechanism to service those things, but that's not really who I am. I'm actually more than that. And you've got to be able to accept that in order to really step into what happens next.
Yeah. And I think that that's a very interesting point that you brought up about the literal, like the neurochemical reasoning behind that, because I think that that's something a lot of people don't actually spend time on. Is, we talk a lot about understanding, the kind of the this gushy stuff of it, but understanding that there's a literal physical chemical reaction that's happening in your brain. And if you don't take care of that component of it, that will set you back dramatically. And not understanding that exists. And that's one of the reasons I personally, when people come to me for advice, defining purpose is one thing. Another thing that I spend time talking about is, don't lose your habit of fitness, because that can propel you even when everything else is going wrong. And for me personally, that's what I hung on to during some of that uncertainty was the fitness routine and getting back into that, because I realized after about 2 years of being out, and I don't want anybody to make the same mistakes that I did during my transition, I'd gotten out of shape. My confidence level was low. And so my brain chemistry was just pegged at becoming a depressed person, because one, you lose that sense of identity and you lose that sense of self, and then it's amplified by the things that you're doing to yourself physically, and you lose some amount of routine. And then next thing you know, you're becoming, what I refer to as kind of the cynical, pissed off, crusty vet. And that's not a good place.
Absolutely.
To be. And that's not a good place, because it's hard to dig yourself out of that hole.
It is. And, because you're older, and this, the physical fitness comes harder as you get older. And it takes a longer time for you to get back these things that you lost. And so You're right. Once you start sliding down that hill, you start to gain momentum as you leave. And, it's important to kind of recognize that there are certain habits that we have from the military that work for us. And then there are certain habits that don't.
Right.
And part of this process of discovery, and this is one of the things we talk about in the handbook, is that you've really got to break down your transition in an integrative way, where optimizing whole health and wellness is one of those factors that you've really, to your point, you have to set some goals for how you're going to do this when you're not wearing the uniform anymore. And the motivation has to come from you, because, it's not a, hey, I've got, formation in the morning and we're going to do PT, and then, it's personal time, and then we show up for work. It's not like that anymore. And so that's an example of how you've got to form a new habit for yourself, because, hey, I've got to be up, I've got to be in formation by, 0600. It just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that there's a temptation, and where this slide starts is when you get out of the military, and it's understandable, right? It's an understandable temptation. The temptation is that you're going to, just relax for a while. And that's good. And I think that you should give yourself maybe even an extended vacation, extended meaning, 30 to 60 days. But at the end of that period, in my opinion, you need to be ready to get back hooked up and engaged in everything that you're doing. Because if you slide too far, it's never going to come back around. And keeping those routines in place, and not, there's a desire to basically just like completely detach from your military life. Sure. In the sense you want to do nothing like you did in the military. That's why you see a lot of people grow their hair out, grow a beard, start waking up late, just kind of meander at their day. The problem is if you do that for too long, that amplifies that detached sense of self from what I've seen. And that's qualitative. I don't have any quantitative data to back that up. But then my experience when I'm looking at vets is they leave so much of what made them who they are behind without understanding that there are things from the military that you need to weave into your new life because they're helpful, right? Military does provide you with very good training. You don't have to drop that all at the door.
Of course. And I think a lot of what you're talking about there is extremely important as you're kind of looking at, this whole transition and what you're going to do, because, you're right. It is extremely, attractive to say, hey, I'm going to be different when I leave. And what you're really saying, and what I believe you're saying, and I'm speaking from my own experience here, is that, man, I'm tired and I need a break.
Yeah.
And when I left the Army back in 2000, it's kind of funny, but I let my hair grow out. I kind of had the mullet thing going on. I had a goatee. I mean, I looked ridiculous now that I think about it. But, doing those things didn't make me feel any better. And what I needed because I worked so hard in the military, I needed a reprieve. But once I had that reprieve, you know what I was looking for? I was looking for the opportunity to work hard again.
Yep.
I was looking for a chance to kind of contribute, to make an impact, and to do all these things that I kind of did in the military, but I wasn't in the military anymore. And so you're exactly right. That short-term solution of I'm going to sleep in late. And, I think we confuse that with needing that break with this is how I want to live my life, because, you would not have been successful in the military if that is truly who you are.
Yep. And
you're going to find that if you try to live like that for a longer period of time, it's probably not going to work out well for you.
Yeah, exactly. And you just shatter your sense of self in that process. Everything about you that you liked mostly tends to fall away by that, because you're like, for me, it was an actual moment that I looked at myself in the mirror. I was like, what are you doing? Because I was about 2.5, 3 years removed from my Marine Corps career. And I looked at myself, it was just a random Tuesday. And I was like, well, this is jacked. I got to switch gears. And by the time I had made that decision, it was an uphill battle. And you talked about the total health concept. And I think that that's key, because a lot of people tend to think, and you and I have talked about this, a lot of people tend to think that this transition from the military is just a career switch. And nothing could be further from the truth, because of all the things that you did in the military and the people you interacted with, and you really treated these people like family. The whole health has to be there. And I personally, and if anybody's struggling, who's maybe trapped there right now, there's a lot of chaos created if you allow yourself to slip, because then you start getting advice from all these different corners, and it's hard to figure out what to focus on first. For anybody who's struggling with that, I have my tool that I use, and Jason, you can feel free to share whatever device you have. I just think about the 5 Bs, and this is how I set up my folders in my hard drive like this. I set up everything in accordance with the 5 Bs, because these are the things I want to focus on: my brain, my body, my bankroll, my buddies, and my business, and in that order. Because I think if you handle things in that order, everything else that's below it tends to start taking care of itself in the process. And
absolutely.
And that's the mental model I use. but it has to be an integrated concept is the key. The tool doesn't necessarily matter. It's not the plan that matters. It's the planning, so that when something goes wrong, you have something to deviate from.
Yeah, and I love what you did there and how you created your own mantra for your life. Because, in the military, we've got a lot of cliches about how we do things, mission first, people always, do the right thing, even when people aren't watching. We've got the value structure. We've got the mission statements. We got unit mottos. We've got all these things that we attach ourselves to. And I think what you did there is very important to step into, that the kind of leader that you're going to be without the military, which is, hey, you know what? I got to come up with my own motto. I got to come up with my own affirmation, my own statement of belief of how I contribute to, my sense of purpose, how I honor my values, and how I'm going to contribute to the rest of society without that uniform.
Yeah.
And the other thing that you talked about was this idea of military transition and career transition. And I think that is something that cannot be overstated. And what we've done is we've turned what is a deeply psychological, spiritual, and cultural transformation from warrior to something outside of that, military identity into a career services program.
Yeah.
And the career is important. And, we've all got bills to pay, and you need to have that job. But the thing to remember is that long before we had resumes, LinkedIn profiles, networking strategies, and career conferences, the very primitive tribal societies made it a point as a part of their culture to reintegrate warriors who were returning from the battlefield.
Yeah.
They did this through a series of traditions and rituals. And so military transition existed long back then. And what they were addressing was the psychological, the cultural, the social, and the spiritual aspects of being the warrior so that you can be productive and repurpose that leadership in society. And we don't have that anymore. And I'm not suggesting that we need to get into primitive ceremonies and rituals. We don't need to do that. But we do need to honor that deeper psychology of what's going on there, because that's what they were doing. And I think that's one of the things that's gotten missed in this whole evolution of what we characterize as transition now. And
yes.
I think it would help if we started to say, okay, well, this is the career services aspect of transition, which, I call kind of a professional preparedness.
Yeah.
But that's different from how you transition and reintegrate from the military. That is a more comprehensive process that you go through.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it's important to make that distinction, because as I'm going through and when I'm doing coaching and when I'm working with veterans one-on-one, it's interesting because what the conversation, what it inevitably starts out at, and this is a part of, assumptions of people who are coming out, but also part of what people are coaching them to think about as they're coming out, is the number one question I get is, can somebody help me with my resume?
Yes.
and my point to them, and I try to, when somebody's asking you for a ham sandwich, you don't hand them just, peanut butter and jelly, right? So I try to give help along those lines, but taking that opportunity to also state that and to work with them on saying, look, we could write a perfectly tailored resume right now for this job that you're trying to get, but I'm more concerned about the question is this job taking you where you want to go? Have you defined how you want to get there, what you want it to look like? Why are you doing this? Is this just something that's an extension of your skills from the military, or is this something you actually want to do? And sometimes you can't get there because it's hard when you're getting out to say what you want, because you don't necessarily know what you don't know yet, right? And it took me some time to figure out what I wanted. And so for anybody that's stuck there, I really recommend, and this is something I steal from Tim Ferriss, because this helped me out a ton. And what he talks about is going through your fear setting, right? So if you don't know what you want, start by talking about what you don't want and literally write this down. We have a tendency as, ambitious or intelligent veterans to, just do the head nod, be like, yeah, I'll totally do that. And we never get around to it because we're like, well, I just thought about it and I don't need to write it down. Write it down and talk about what it is that you don't want. Because what I realized that I didn't want was it wasn't that I didn't want to, work 60 hours a week, because I seem to work 60 hours a week no matter what, just because I like working.
Yeah. Tell me about it. Yeah. that is the idea. And I'll just, I will back that up. I mean, I work harder now than I ever did in the military. Now, it doesn't always feel like work.
Exactly.
But one of the things I've come to accept about myself is that, I'm going to fiddle with things. Like, this is just who I am. And again, I confuse the need of having a break with, this whole idea of, well, I'm going to take it easy.
Yep.
And I would venture to say that most veterans don't take it easy and don't want to be honest with you. Like, they want to be engaged. They want to contribute. They want to lead. They want to make an impact. They want to help other people kind of reach their potential, because this is what we did so well in the military. So I absolutely agree with you on that.
Yeah, I would take it a step further. You see so much, and when I say so much, I mean, like, this is almost all that our community talks about collectively, which I think also needs to change, but that's probably for a whole different episode. But I think that a lot of the depression that we see within the veteran community is not so much depression as it is that it's a lack of clarity. And what's more importantly is just straight up boredom. I ask a lot. That's when I'm coaching. I'm like, when's the last time you did something that excites you? And I mean, like, really excites you. And they're like, well, my job's not that exciting. I'm like, stop talking about not your job, right? Just something that you can control, that you do, that excites you. For example, I took up mountain biking. I love it. You know why? I feel like it keeps me sane. It's dangerous, which provides that adrenaline hit that I love so much. It's physically challenging. I can't think about anything else when I'm mountain biking. It's just not possible, right? And so, I live in Anchorage. There's no lift serve mountain biking, so I literally have to push my bike up a hill just to ride it down. That whole process of being out in the woods and hiking through the woods, pushing my bike up a mountain so I can ride down at Mach 5 is fantastic. And it's great. And I would say that contributes more to who I am as a person and how I interact with other people than anything I do for work.
Yeah. And so like that's an important aspect about yourself that you discovered. Mm-hmm. And these are kind of important things that we've got to take inventory of, because you're right. The fear factor when that shows up in transition, and the most common question that I get asked too is, hey, Jason, will you look at my resume? Yeah, I'm happy to look at your resume, but I'm not a resume expert. I'm not a career services expert, and there are people who are better qualified to do that. But I'm happy to look at it, and I'll give you feedback. But the question I always end up asking them is does this reflect who you want to be when you can't wear that uniform anymore? And what they'll say more often than not, the thing that I hear in response is, well, this is what I have to say to get that job. And my response will be, well, you're not answering my question. And the reason why they're not answering the question is because at that moment they can't. And this is what fear does in the transition process, because what we're looking at is this, okay, I've got to pay the bills. I got to have a new job. I want to be able to tell people that, I'm going to be going into this new job and working for this company, and that everything's going to be okay. And that I can protect my nest egg and my kids can go to college. And that's what we do. And so what we're doing is we've set the bar at the minimum standard for success.
Exactly.
And so more often than not, that's all you get is the minimum standard for success. And what I think veterans need to do, and in your case, it might be, riding down the hill at Mach 5.
Yeah, exactly.
But what we have to do is we have to start asking ourselves, okay, well, what do I really want?
Exactly.
What does that ideal scenario look like? Like, what if I kind of achieved all that minimum stuff and then some.
Yep.
And start to believe in that kind of a reality for yourself. And when you start setting your target at that point, you're going to find that you're going to get the minimum, but it's also going to feel a whole lot better because you're doing the things that you want to do. You're doing the things that you are intended to do based on your values and your purpose and your intrinsic strengths. And that's going to be more fulfilling for you in the long run, which is why when we set the bar at resume, hey, look at my resume, what you're saying is that this is my bottom level and this is where I'm focused.
Yep.
So when that's where you are, don't be surprised if that's all you get. And then people end up in that job, and then they, 6 months or a year later, they're a lot of times very frustrated because they're not achieving what they want. And to your point, they're having that sense of boredom. Well, you set the bar at the minimum. So the minimum's what you got.
Yeah. And I think that that what you brought up about setting that standard so low, and I think that this is something for any of you who are listening that are out and are starting to achieve or have kind of turned that corner mentally. We need to be focused on shifting the conversation, and this is my opinion, about not focusing so much on getting people back to some level that they had achieved in the military, and assuming that your peak was when you were in the military. Your peak was not in the military. I mean, you can take what you did in the military and amplify that dramatically, and you can become so much more than you ever were. Like I shudder to think what the 23-year-old version of myself would be able to do against the version of me now. Right. Because it's not even, it wouldn't even be fair. I mean, that was, 23-year-old Sergeant Honeycutt, who was pretty sharp, but compared to me now, it's not even a competition. I would destroy him. I would destroy him. And that's a good thing. And you should be focused on that too. And I'll say that this cynicism that's entered our community, General Mattis, when I sat down and talked with him, he had a great quote. And I think it's something that everybody needs to hear, is that cynicism is a form of cowardice. And the reality is that it's easy to sit back and say, well, that won't work, or that's not going to work because, or that's not realistic. If you start hearing those words, you're either talking to the wrong people, or you have become one of those people, and you need to seriously sit down with yourself and ask yourself why you are doing that. Because it, to me, is a fear-based scarcity mentality. And this I'll take into the point that I really wanted to hammer on. I never get upset with vets who are going through the process and are looking for help and are trying to better themselves and just don't know what they don't know, right? That's where folks like us are supposed to step in. Now, what I do get upset about, and what I see happening a lot, and I think that this is one of the reasons that we're seeing so much fear from people who are coming out or that haven't transitioned yet, is they're seeing that cynicism. And I'm going to tell you, if you position yourself as a mentor, you take on a different level of responsibility in my mind. And you need to be really, really tight about what you're telling people and how you tell it to them, because you can pull them off track dramatically if you don't know what you're talking about. You said it just a moment ago, Jason. You said, I'm not a career expert. I'm not a resume expert. If you don't know, or you haven't studied up on the subject yourself, and I mean, the minimum standard in my mind is you've read at least 3 books on the subject. That's absolute minimum. If you haven't gone that far, what you need to be thinking about is not how can I help this person personally, but who can help this person, right? Because if you go and you start setting veterans down the wrong path and you let that cynicism poison them, it poisons the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. And then community-wide, we're dealing with what we deal with right now, right? That cynicism comes in. And
Agreed.
So the litmus test for those of you who are getting out and not sure about who to listen to as you're going through this, because there's all these different competing levels of advice. People have gone through like 15 versions of their resume because they've talked to 15 different people, and each person says, well, that looks like crap. Listen to me. If the person you're talking to has not done what you are trying to do, unfortunately, you shouldn't listen to them. That's what you need to be focused on, is if they aren't doing what you're trying to do, don't listen to them. And if you're a mentor and you haven't done what your person's trying to do, you need to send them on to somebody who can actually help them.
Yeah. And I think that's good advice to kind of heed. And, the other thing that you talked about, which I think is really kind of worth noting, is this idea of the military is my peak experience. And unfortunately, the language we use about transition and retirement has a sense of finality to it, right?
Yeah.
Separation, retirement. And so and we see the time when we're getting out of the service as kind of crossing the finish line, so we framed it the wrong way. But when you think about it, you still got another half of your life to live. And the military experience, and, one of the things that I think is going to become one of these greater issues for our society, the military experience is designed to prepare you for a greater leadership experience after the military.
Precisely right.
So you don't step out of the military, you're supposed to step up. And when you look at the history of society, and I would even say our country has been this way, but even as you go all the way back to primitive tribal cultures, that's the way it's always been, is that military leaders repurpose their leadership for the good of the whole of society.
Yep.
And there is, Joseph Campbell has written about this in terms of an archetypal model that describes this on a very spiritual level. And these are the kinds of things that happen when you leave the military. And so what's happening is that we don't celebrate and showcase the champions across the veteran culture who are doing these kinds of things. The problem with that is that we live with an all-volunteer force. And if we're not setting these examples in life after the military, it's going to be really hard to attract the best talent and the best kinds of recruits to come in through the front door.
Yep.
If, as we're leaving the back door, the things that are characterizing our population are social issues like suicide, mental health issues, this job, languishing and these people who are really disconnected in life after the military service. That's not really kind of creating that example. And so what I say to people is that, who have this selfless mentality about how they're serving and they want to continue serving, what I challenge them is how are you setting the example for other military leaders and for people who were your age when you joined the military to say, I want to be that guy or gal. I want to be that person. I want to ascend into that level, and the military is one of the ways that I'm going to be able to get there. And we all have a responsibility to be that example for the next generation. Because I'll tell you what, the young captains and the lieutenants who are that are in the Army now, they're going to have it a hell of a lot harder than I did.
Yeah.
Because the veteran demographic is a disappearing population across our national landscape.
Yep.
And so it's going to be harder for them. And so we have to set an example with how we live our lives. And to your point, we got to shelve that cynicism. And it takes courage to lead, but who better in this post 9/11 age to demonstrate that courage than the modern veteran?
I completely agree. And this is something, to me, this is the aspirational identity. The question becomes, if it's not going to be us, then who? Because I can't think of another demographic within the United States or the world really that has as much influence as the veterans of the U.S. and that has as much respect as the veterans of the U.S. if we jump up and grab it and own it. And for me personally, when I'm looking at people that I'm willing to mentor, and people are going to be like, what do you mean? You don't mentor every vet who comes your way? No, because some don't have the right mindset. The mindset I'm looking for is I want veterans who want to step up and become titans within their community. I want these people who are going to lead from a desire to bring everybody together, because the only place where I've seen where all these different demographics that we hear being talked about so much day to day in the news, where it legitimately doesn't matter, is in the military. And people cannot comprehend that those things don't matter unless we show them.
Right.
And if we show them, we can put our country back in a position where we are leading from the front once more, and we can attack real problems that actually matter instead of spending so much time on these little micro divisions that supposedly are these mountains that we can never overcome. And I see within the veteran community the potential to solve that for society. And when you look at that in becoming a titan of your community, you have to have defined your purpose. And for the record, you don't have to
Absolutely.
have just one, right? My only suggestion is that if you have more than one, make sure they're integrated so you're not being pulled in 60 different directions.
Yeah.
And for me personally, the whole reason I started Spotlight, to your point, Jason, is we need to highlight veteran success stories more than we need to continue to focus on the downside, because I don't think you lift people up by telling them that they're in a hole. I just don't think that's a responsible way to proceed. And I would challenge any of you veterans who are listening to this to be more engaged in that process. And we just had Veterans Day this week. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of conversation about veteran suicide, veteran homelessness, PTSD. And I saw everybody and their sister posting, links on Facebook to say, hey, if you need help, go get help. Here's a number for the Veterans Crisis Hotline, or here's the number for this nonprofit, or here's the number for this. And I'm like, hey, the only people that are really suited in that situation, if a veteran is really struggling, the hotline, sure, whatever. If that helps somebody, great. But I would love to see more veterans just calling one another directly. You have your group of people from the military, grab them up. Give them a phone call, set a weekly phone call with them. It doesn't have to be calendared, but just make it a point to say, hey, if I've identified somebody I think is struggling, I want to give them a call personally. Don't force them to go to the VA to get help when you're right there. Because that to me is a total deferral of your responsibility, one, to your other veterans, but to society as a whole. And to me, it's become too much. It's become too pervasive of a mindset that, hey, you should be able to call the Veterans Crisis Hotline. You should be able to go to the VA and seek immediate mental health help. We can have policy conversations about that stuff all day, but no matter what, every veteran knew other veterans, or any veteran who's ever hurt himself knew other veterans, and the people that were in the best position, in my opinion, to help them were the people that they knew.
Absolutely. And I think what you're talking about, like when you expand that mindset and how it impacts the transition and reintegration process, you see that there's this deferral mindset. It's okay. Well, that's not my responsibility anymore. And that's some of the language that you hear from people who are in the space, which is, along the lines of, hey, you've got to, manage your expectations. You got to take a step back and if you're not getting that sense of fulfillment, if you're not being able to really spread your wings and express your full potential and leadership in whatever job you have, then my call to action to you is find it or create it.
Yep.
And, we have a responsibility to really kind of own that leadership burden as we step into society. And so the buck stops with us. These problems that we have across our society, that you always hear the bickering about, depending upon what your political affiliation is and what news, where you get your news, and all this kinds of stuff. We are a nation that is starving for leadership. And as veterans, even though we are a small percentage of the population, we've got to stop deferring that, and we have to start embracing that and saying, you know what, even if it's just in my community, even if it's how I interact with my neighbor today, even if it's how I interact with my son's baseball coach, or how I'm going to interact with my family today, I'm going to show some leadership. I'm going to set an example. I'm going to be responsible for me and be that person that other people can look to say, hey, you know what? I want to follow what they are doing. That's what we're missing across our community. And this is the kind of thing that we have to really have the courage to step into and say, you know what, I'm tired of this and it's time to change. Yeah. And, you know, one of the things that I hear so many transitioning veterans who step out and they're working with leaders or whatnot is how underwhelming they see the kinds of leadership challenges that are out there. And the question I always ask them is, okay, so now how are you going to set the example for how you believe it should be? You know, in a way that inspires, you know, doesn't direct or condescend other people, but inspires people, because that's what you had to do in the military. So how are you going to step into that responsibility now? And here's the thing with that. As scary as that proposition is, I promise you that once you start doing it, you're going to feel better about yourself. You're going to get that spring back in your step. You're going to feel the same ways you felt in the military, because now you're stepping into your potential and you're being fueled by your purpose and that sense of values that you hold.
Completely agree. And one thing I've noticed that I think feeds into this continued reliance on these what I call contradom, which is my acronym for conventional transition wisdom. And you see that, hey, take a step back.
Great word, man.
Yeah.
That is a great word.
So you see that one. Yeah, use it away. You heard it here first. Spotlight. But the reality is that contradom, what it does is it forces us into a certain mindset where we are taking instead of giving. And one of the things that I think that this is a very strange insight for some people to hear, but I didn't recognize it until I had heard it from the mouth of a veteran who I was coaching. Really driven, really intelligent veteran who's just stuck in the mud because he'd been listening to the wrong people. And there's all this insistence that the services surrounding veterans need to be free. And I'll propose to you veterans that you don't necessarily want things that are free. One, because you get what you pay for, because you just get whatever somebody's willing to give you, right? You tend to deal more with volunteers, which is great. There's certainly a place for that, but volunteers tend to only have limited time. And if they have limited time, what happens is you tend to shuffle through people that you're working with, right? Because volunteers fall off the face of the earth all the time. Maybe they started doing it because they wanted to feel a little bit better about themselves in that process. And there's a continual insistence on free services, free services, free services, free services. The reality is, in my opinion, if you want something better within the veteran transition space, we should be focused on supporting more veteran businesses in that space, because you're going to get what the market actually wants. You're going to get targeted, specific help, because industries can jump up and respond a hell of a lot better. And I think that it comes from a misunderstanding about what driven veterans want, because what I heard from this veteran that I was helping in particular was, I was like, why don't you go use these services? Because I had a whole list of them, right? All the resources you could think of. There's list after list after list. And he said, I'm not a charity case. And I don't want to feel like one, because I feel like if I use those services, I'm taking away from another veteran who needs them more. And to me, that was just a mind-blowing insight, because I had never considered that making somebody engage with free services was making them feel helpless. And I would like to see more veterans in this space who know what they are doing and have maybe been out for a while, being able to set up and give a business within that space, because free services are what they are. And the nature of nonprofits is that at a certain point, they have to start focusing on fundraising. Right. And when the focus switches from fundraising to servicing the people they're helping, the nonprofit always falls apart. And I would say, look no further than the Wounded Warriors Project, what happened to them back in 2016, the scandal they went through. Because eventually you got to get your money from somewhere if you want to keep helping people. And as a veteran, you can vote with your own money who you want that person to be, because that's the person that you think helps you the most. Right. And the market will respond. If there's BS advice, well, guess what? That person's not going to stay in business. And
Yeah.
I would say that that move away from free stuff needs to happen sooner rather than later. What are your thoughts? I think it's controversial.
So I do. And I recognize that a lot of these things that happen in the space is, I think they come with the best of intentions. And
exactly.
I think that people form a lot of these nonprofit entities with a desire to show their gratitude and to give something back to men and women who make sacrifices that, in many cases they can't understand, but they want to help and they want to do well by that population. And so I think that is fantastic, that there's that compassion out there. I think that in many ways, they're not really sure what to do. And so when they start actually helping a handful of people, they get that positive reinforcement and they start, kind of going down that path. What I think is very hard and dangerous for the veteran is that when you start to kind of look just for the free stuff, make sure that you're not valuing yourself at a dollar amount of $0.
Exactly.
Because that's what starts to happen subconsciously, is that when you start to say that I need the discount and I need the stuff for free, what you're signaling to everyone around you is that is your kind of worth. And I think that as long as you're not doing that, as long as you're accepting it with an open heart and gratitude, but you are firm in what your true value proposition is, I think that accepting gratitude is fine, but it's not a way of life. And,
right.
You're a military person, receiving the gratitude is one thing, but the challenge that I give people is what would it take for you to believe that you're worth the premium? And if you're not willing to make that investment into yourself in terms of the premium option, then why would anybody else make that investment in you? And that's a very difficult reality to kind of see in yourself, to say, hey, you know what? I'm worth this much. And so I'm worth this investment that I'm willing to make in myself. And I am, I'm worth this stuff that's out there. It's fine. But, I want something more and I'm worth it.
Yeah.
And I think once you start saying that, you are recognizing your own confidence and belief in yourself and what's potentially possible.
Yeah.
So you're right. There are many sides to that. And again, I recognize that the gratitude that goes into that and how people are trying to express that through a lot of these organizations. And I think that, it's their way of giving to that population. So
certainly. The
challenge, and what I would say to veterans is that, make sure that your value isn't tied to the price tag of what you're giving to that. And what would you have to believe about yourself to see that you are worth the premium and make that investment in yourself?
Exactly. And that's the key, is that it is an investment in yourself. And for me personally, what I've noticed with veterans who interact with paid services versus veterans who interact with free services exclusively is that the veterans who actually pay for something or otherwise have some type of skin in the game are more likely to actually follow through and do the things because they have skin in the game. They've put something down and says, yes, and in their own mind, it says, I'm going to do this. And I want to do this so much, I'm willing to actually pay for it. I think that creates a very different mindset walking in. So we are running out of time though, Jason. So I wanted to just take a minute for you. You released your book this week, which is very exciting.
Yes.
Let's take a second and talk about that and give the people the pitch, and we'll wrap this thing up.
Well, thanks for that. And, and I appreciated this conversation today. And the book Beyond the Military is, everything that I've experienced through two transitions that I did very poorly myself. And, we've got doctrine for everything in the military except for the toughest mission, which is leaving. And what I did is I partnered with Dr. Shauna Springer, who has got more than 2 decades of work as a clinical psychologist in relationship management and building healthy relationships, to really kind of create a comprehensive reference that uses the military decision-making process as a framework to guide veterans through this process of transition in a very self-paced, introspective way. And so it's designed to complement the current focus on career services programs, because in this reference, you won't learn how to write a resume. You won't learn how to fill out a LinkedIn profile. But what it will do is it will challenge you to understand your purpose, your values, your intrinsic strengths, your belief structure, your intentions, your fears, the common factors that led to your success, and help you find opportunities that align to that core sense of identity for life beyond the military. It's got over 35 unique exercises for you to kind of work through, and it's written with the intimacy of a coaching partnership, so that as you're going through it, I'm acting as your coach and Dr. Springer is acting as your relationship consultant to help you really kind of find and really kind of lean into the things that we've really talked about today.
Awesome. And I'll say that I think that these types of things are very important. And veterans, if you want to start getting better advice within that space, working on things like this that Jason's talking about and supporting those types of businesses is absolutely key. So, Jason, thanks so much for joining me today. And for everybody else, thanks for listening. Hey everyone, thanks again for listening to another episode of the Spotlight Podcast. And I just wanted to take a second to ask you who you think should be interviewed on the show. Who do you think is out there that's just absolutely crushing it that the veteran population needs to hear from? That's what we want to hear from you. Send us your suggestions to spotlight@thezenveteran.com. That's SPOTLIGHT @thezenveteran.com. Thanks again for listening.